Welcome to ARA'S Through, a podcast about living a meaningful life in difficult times. I'm Larry Lariosa, and I'm a life coach and licensed marriage and family therapist. In these uncertain times, maintaining a sense of well-being and purpose feels more challenging, yet more important than ever. In this podcast, I'll feature guests who have used their life experience, passion, and creativity to find personal meaning and deeper connection. As the saying goes, the only way out is through. And I hope these conversations help inspire you to live life to its fullest. So thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of ARA'S Through, a podcast about living a meaningful life in difficult times. My name is Larry Lariosa, your host, and today I talk to someone who uses her creativity not only as a platform for self-expression and catharsis, but as a tool to help others, particularly those whose identities may not fit neatly into a single category or experience. We'll hear her journey to creating meaning through her art and advocacy work, pushing through the confines of the imagination and bringing it to just about every possible medium. Ara Chawdhury is a Bisaya Bengali transmedia storyteller and human rights activist. Her debut feature, Miss Bulalacao, screened at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 2016 Best Philippine Cinema program. She recently staged a multimedia project called Maldisyon about generational trauma and has recently published a children's book titled Marichin Marukoy, Mangayo Ko'g Asin. Welcome to the show, Ara.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm excited to talk to you and get to know you a little bit more, but also have this bigger conversation that might inspire others. So before we get started with the questions, there's a lot happening in the world. How are you doing in these times?
I'm I'm still making art, because in a way there's also the question of, are we artists because we're all trying to cope? And art has always been my way of coping, so I'm making art. That is the sum of it.
Somebody once told me that the best art is created either when the world is intact and sort of together, or the world is falling apart. I mean, it's a reflection of the times, whether it's a joyous time or whether it's a time of a lot of grief.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell us a little bit about your story and how that has shaped you into the person and the artist that you are.
So I'm half Indian or half Bengali because my father escaped the 1971 genocide in Bangladesh and ended up in the Philippines, where he met my mom. And it was really transactional, their partnership. He was an expat and she was putting 8 siblings to school. It was a rough marriage because like the culture clash of a Muslim man, and she was Catholic. She liked singing, she liked dancing, and then in Muslim culture, those things are frowned upon. So I understood that it was a unconventional situation. Like I'd watch the TV and there would be no representation for my context. Everybody would be Filipino, everybody would be full Filipino, church going, blah blah blah. And we didn't do that. We celebrated Ramadan. We went to Indian weddings. We had like different festivals, and I didn't see any of that around me except for when my father would take us to embassy parties, for example. So I also noticed that my Filipino family was also non-conventional because we spoke Bisaya at home. When I was young, we lived in Manila, so my playmates would speak Tagalog and then I would respond in English because that was the common tongue back home. And when I did speak Tagalog, it was in this Bisaya accent. Like instead of saying puede is Spanish, pero like the Tagalogs would say pwede and I would say pwede, right? So I couldn't make sense of who I was for a very, very long time. I couldn't make sense of who I was when it came to where do I place myself. And so I was always explaining myself, explaining who I was, explaining who my parents were over and over again. And I always felt put under a microscope when those things happened. I was always anxious about whether people would accept me after the explanation or not. And we also moved around a lot because like my parents split up and then we'd moved to Biliran, and then that was another set of cultural expectations that I had to meet, another reshuffling of the explanations that I used to tell back home in Manila. Now I had to explain it within their context. So I feel like my childhood and like that nomad lifestyle prepared me for becoming a translator. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not just a filmmaker, I'm also like a cultural consultant on different projects. I'm also constantly translating not just language but also context. Also, like, what does it mean to be Filipino? What does it mean to be from the regions? What does it mean? What does class look like in the Philippines? What does race look like in the Philippines? What are the regional stories in the Philippines and the context? Because we are not a monoculture, even if it feels that way in some islands, and even if it feels that way here in the diaspora.
As I hear your story, I'm thinking about the role of storytelling, and because your reality did not echo what you were internally feeling, and you talked about it with like just the cultural context, you almost had to create stories as a child to see yourself and maybe explain the world around you.
Absolutely. I loved folklore growing up. My mom could leave me in a bookstore and go shopping, and then she could leave me there for hours. You know, nobody would say, hey, you're not paying for the book, leave, or whatever. We didn't have an extensive library set up in the Philippines, like not like you do here. So I was always looking at people's bookshelves. Even now, that's still a habit. Like I look at people's bookshelves to see like what's interesting, even though I don't necessarily have the mental space for to read as much as I used to.
Yeah. You also talked about this notion of belonging and not belonging. And my belief is sometimes that's a double edged sword because it's hard when we grow up. We don't see ourselves. But then we also acquire what I think are superpowers. And this is the ability to kind of read the world. Like you talked about one superpower being empathy, that you learned how to, even if there were groups that you didn't necessarily belong to, your own feeling of not belonging gave you a lot of empathy. And can you say more about that? Because I know social activism is on your resume as well, and how that and storytelling might all come together.
Yeah, so because of growing up now and constantly having to explain myself, I got really tired of explaining myself. But I learned to use, as he would say, the superpower of storytelling to help other people's stories. And I was a human rights activist in the Philippines through Dakila, which is a human rights artist collective. And we would amplify campaigns, we would amplify advocacies, we would partner with other nonprofits, NGOs, and support their campaigns, support certain bills, for example, the SOGI bill in the Philippines.
The SOGI bill refers to the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression Equality Bill, also known as the Anti Discrimination Bill. Ara shares another story about advocacy.
There was this specific incident where this uh, she was a teacher, she was a law teacher, but also she was a staffer for a counselor. She came to us because there was a coal plant that wanted to expand in downtown Cebu. She knew that she needed their message to be amplified because the way that their community was perceived in Cebu, they were seen as squatters. But actually, they were natives. They were like a fishing village that had been there even during the Spanish time. So they've been there for centuries, I want to say. And it might look very humble from the outside, but it's a tight community that's been there for the longest time. They own the land, they own their homes, and there was so much culture that came out from that village. Like a lot of the great Cebuano ballads came from that community because they had rich traditions, and people didn't know about their community. It wasn't highlighted as much as the Spanish colonial stuff. So we just amplified their story, but it was really them. And as you say, the superpower, the storytelling superpower is the most effective when it's in service to others.
Yeah, well stated. And I think ultimately, as artists, that is what our power is, right? That we have the ability to, not just for ourselves, but to elevate voices or elevate stories outside of ours. I wonder, Ara, you have done so many things. I mean, you look at your website, you've done so much filmmaking and advocacy work. You have your book, and I wonder of all the things you did, is there a piece, is there a film or a craft that you feel the most proud of? And why?
Oh no.
I know.
My children are gonna hear this and they're gonna be like, me. um that's a really hard question because like I don't think of the projects as something that's locked and like boxed in necessarily. Like I think of Miss Bulalacao, for example, as something that I want to screen it in black and white. It's finished, and I'm proud of the work that we did, and it's almost 10 years. It's 10 years this year, and I feel like it could have been better. Constantly we look at the projects that are done, and I'm always thinking about what I could have done better, and I take those lessons and I apply them to the next project. And then after that project, I always think, what could have I done better? So it's hard to think in terms of like, which of these projects am I the most proud of? What I do think is, which of these projects am I still in?
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you want to say a little bit more about like your current project?
Oh, with pleasure. Right now, I'm deep in Marichin's world. I've been working on this stop motion film around this character that I created called Marichin Marukoy. It started as a poem during the pandemic period. There was this argument going online about who should be representing us.
And by us, Ara is referring to Filipinos and Filipino Americans.
There was this folklorist from Canada who'd been doing research about the aswang for a long time.
Aswang is a term for shape-shifting creatures in Philippine folklore, which Ara will define in a few minutes.
They made a documentary, and then in the process they befriended their sources, and then it turned into a whole relationship. They'd been going back and forth. They had a wife and child who were Filipino, and then somebody found out about them shortly before the pandemic, and then found out belatedly that they were white and got pissed that they were the ones who were running a website around Filipino folklore. And because this was also the time that everybody was all about cultural reclamation, cultural sensitivity, and decolonizing institutions. And so there was this huge wave of people calling out this person for being duplicitous, quote unquote. And then, so the people who already knew him from back home started defending him. And then it turned into a whole argument between Phil-Am and Filipinos about gatekeeping, all of that stuff. Like everybody was posting think pieces. And I was reading the tea. I was reading the tea, like your neighborhood chismosa. and I had a lot of thoughts about it, but I wasn't necessarily siding with any of them because I'm half, you know. I've been called the fake Cebuana. I have been told that I cannot represent being Filipino because I'm half Indian, because I'm not full Filipino. Despite my lived experience, despite growing up with the culture, despite living deeply in several different places, you know, like I understand the hurts that arise when people who have more access end up becoming the quote unquote authority figure of your lived experience. But I also understand what it means to be somebody who is wide open and absorbing every single piece of information because you're hungry for it. So it's like it's a balance. It's a very delicate balance. And what I do remember is the overconsumption that we experienced in the Philippines. Like because I grew up in an island, everything that you receive in the island becomes a finite resource. So you have to turn it over, you have to use every single piece of it, you have to like there's no trash that gets left over after something's been consumed in the islands because it's rare that we even get anything. We have this mindset in the islands of being very careful with what we receive.
Hmm. Can you say more about that?
So my mom was she worked at the tourism side of the government for a while. And so every time we'd get tourists, every time we'd get Phil-Ams or Manileños coming to our island, coming to Biliran, we'd tour them and I'd come along and they'd enjoy themselves. It's a vacation, 'di ba? But for me, this was where I lived. Like we were just going around my backyard, so to speak. And I'd watch them. I'd watch how they interacted with nature. I'd watch how they'd interact with the experience and notice how like sure they were vulnerable at the time. They were wide open to us. They were curious to as to how we lived and stuff like that. But afterwards they wouldn't even send letters. They wouldn't even respond to calls, you know. And I think that when it comes to engaging with nature, engaging with the resources of the Philippines, people take this consumer mindset. So they consume what they can to escape their lives for a minute, but they don't think about what they leave behind. And I've carried that for a really long time because it's not just people of other races who are exploitative in the Philippines. Like often exploitation in the Philippines is by our own kind. So when that drama was happening, I was thinking about the lore behind Baboy Gabakya, like around the mythology of the aswang.
Aswang and baboy, can you just define those super quick?
Oh, so aswang is this supernatural creature. There's no one definition in modern times about what aswang means, but there are these shapeshifters who consume blood, who eat atay or liver, who eat your innards, and so they're kind of like Philippine vampires. But according to Leyte historian Ronaldo Borinaga, the earliest known use of the word aswang was for a Caracoa boat. It was the name of a boat that could disappear, purportedly disappear, you know. And baboy means pig. So pigs, crows, the specific kind of bird with red eyes, etc., etc. These were different forms that the aswang could take. So they'd shapeshift into different animals. So I got it into my head, what if the aswang could shapeshift into a baboy, into a pig, and people would try to take the baboy and turn it into lechon, roast pig, right? Because that's like one of our Cebuano delicacies. So I was playing with that concept. It turned into a poem. I sent it to my old editor, si Mike Obeñeta, who is also now US based. And he said, he was reading it and he was like, the images make me think that this could be a children's book. And I'm like, but it's too dark. So, but you know, like the seed was there. And I thought about what I wanted to do with it. And I didn't know anything about publishing at the time. But I did know filmmaking. I knew at least what the processes were, like how to apply for grants, at least. So my friend Shomara Glindmayer, who is also a Cebuana based in Louisiana, she showed me these Blythe dolls, which are collector's item dolls. They were designed by Alison Katzman and produced by Kenner in 1972. But they were only in production for a year because the kids were freaked out by the big eyes and the big heads at the time. But I think they were inspired by those paintings. Do you remember?
The big eyes.
Yes, big eyes,
Yeah.
exactly. So they
Keen,
were
I think,
inspired
is
by
the
that.
name. Yeah.
Margaret Keane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it took a while before they picked back up, but they were picked up for production by a Japanese company. So there's a big doll customizing community within the Blythe world. I was obsessed with ball jointed dolls in college, but I was a broke student in the Philippines, so I could never afford a doll. But now Shomara was showing me these dolls, and I looked at the price, and I'm like, hey, I can I can revisit this. And I really loved how the custom dolls looked, because some people would customize them to look a little bit realistic. When they'd spray over the dolls, the shine would disappear and they looked a little bit more interesting to me. So I got into that. I got into customizing the dolls, and I was also like looking for a way to distract myself from the news barrage. This was around October 2024. You know what happened in October 2024, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very much aware.
Yeah, so that was happening, and I was also seeing the Islamophobia around me, and that was triggering because I don't like to talk about my identity a lot, because I also feel that because my context is very specific and I don't really have a community of Filipino Indians, it's hard to relate to other people if I start from that. Like, it's hard for other people to relate to me, so I don't. I start with them. I start with, okay, I'll talk to you about what our common connection is. So not a lot of people know that I was raised Muslim, and so they say all of these anti-Muslim slurs in front of me, and it hurts. Like, my own relatives would post really hurtful stuff, and I couldn't. I shut down, and it still makes me cry to think about what's happening right now. So whew. So I started trying to heal my inner kid, the Muslim kid in me, by going to dolls, and
It's really powerful what you're saying and connecting those dots around how there's maybe that kid part that is getting some healing, and also fantasy, right? Fantasy from away from what's happening in reality.
like just the fantasy of like children who can access food.
Yeah.
That's crazy that that's a fantasy. But I also, like, I think it's ever since I came to the US, I got really interested in ancestry, like looking into my ancestry, trying to trace the family story. And there was a great great grandfather who, it turns out that he moved to Biliran Island, where I spent most of my childhood. He moved there from Samar during the time of the Balangiga massacre. So I saw this beautiful film by Kevin de la Cruz called Balangiga, A Howling Wilderness, and found out about the history of the American occupation during that time and the massacre that happened, which basically cleared Samar because they killed everybody above the age 10. And I got into trying to figure out ancestral trauma, and I noticed that we had this recurring pattern in my family line of becoming orphans at 9 to 10, like that age. My parents split up when I was 9, and after that I didn't hear from my dad until I was 12, I think. Also because my mom was actively pushing him away. Shout out to like the kids of single parents. And then I found out that my mom had been orphaned when she was 9 with both parents. Like, Lola died from childbirth and Lolo died from a heart attack a couple of months later. Like, he couldn't live without her. And before that, like, her great grandfather, I think, was also orphaned. My dad was also lost his mom at a very, very young age. So there was this recurring pattern of becoming orphaned at that age. And I met a shaman immediately before we moved here. I learned from them. I had like an intuitive awakening. I also got Reiki. So I became very sensitive about like soul patterns and soul contracts and what we might be replaying from previous lifetimes. So I became really hyper focused on the idea of being an orphan and how it felt in the body, how the desperation felt in the body to be a child and have to like grow up immediately, to fend for yourself, to feed yourself, all of that stuff. Because I guess like it was familiar in my lifetime, but also familiar in a very, very deep way. And so you'd read about children who couldn't eat, and I could feel it in my body, and I needed to express it somehow in a way that made sense to me. Like I needed to put it in front of me, which is also why I do this, why I make art. I There's stuff that's a jumble in my head that I cannot make sense of if it's just in my head. And if I keep it there, I'm just gonna go crazy. So I need to expunge it. I need to bring it out into the world, whether it's through writing, whether it's through drawing, whether it's through like whatever medium is in front of me. And at the moment, it was just doll customization.
Let's take a break, and we'll return to our interview with Ara Chawdhury. How has your art given you a sense of meaning, belonging, or connection with others?
So as I'm bringing it out, I'm finding the people who resonate with it, who resonate with what I'm trying to do and the process through which I'm trying to bring this out. Because like with filmmaking especially, like there's structures in place. Film school is really good at teaching structure, but then it's also hard to divorce yourself from the same structure. And we've also been like me and Christian, we've been experimenting with guerrilla filmmaking for like at least 2 decades.
Christian is Ara's creative and life partner who you met in episode 6.
Because in Cebu, like I said, in the island, you take what you receive and you churn out what you can, diba? It's not like we don't have a lot of access, so we sort of have to reverse engineer everything. So even the process of filmmaking, we've had to reverse engineer, where the only important thing is what's in the frame. And there are people who come to the project who are excited by what it looks like, and then they try to apply certain systems, which I understand is part of the filmmaking process when you're industry adjacent or when you want to be part of the industry. But I struggle with gainful employment. Or let's just say na I struggle with I didn't go to film school. That's not how I learned how to make films. So I clash with people who have expectations when they come onto set of professionalism, right? But with people who come to it with craft mindset, I treat it more like a knitting club more than a film set these days, or at least during the art process. Also because I'm also still learning through this process. I just did, like at the moment that we were recording, I just did a lighting test for the set. I sort of set the deadline of we're going to do art for like 1 month and then shoot for another month. That did not happen. I'm seeing that the people who are coming up and volunteering also can only like give like a day of their time, 2 days of their time. But they spend a day with me, and I see that their inner children are also coming to play. Like last night when we were adding like finishing touches to the background, and then we were like, hey, it needs something on the ground. And then we started smearing our fingers with paint, and then like just touching here and there, making an impressionistic mural. And we were like, hey, this is working. And it wasn't like on a traditional film set, you would have like the art department with very, very clear roles. This person is the background artist. This person is the props guy. This person is the puppeteer. But last night, everybody was playing with the background. Everybody was contributing. And like that's probably not sustainable.
But there's something, I mean, kind of thinking about it in terms of meaning, there's something deeply spiritual and
Yeah.
communal and collaborative
Yeah.
about your process that I think is so refreshing, because you're right. There's when we start, and I am as well not. I don't feel like I'm really trained formally in anything. Maybe being a therapist, but certainly my art, I'm not really formally trained in much.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know sometimes the more rules that and the more sort of external roles and expectations, the spiritual part of the creative process shrinks
Mm.
for me. And I'm hearing that for you, that
Yeah.
it becomes more about this product. And then back to your point about sort
Yeah.
of the Philippines being a country that has historically been, I mean, we have so many exports from that country, and we have often been products.
Yeah.
So there's just something
Yeah.
wonderful about how your process and how you look at
Yeah.
this, your creative process.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head na about like allowing spirit also into the process, because how can you listen to your intuition when you're constricting yourself to parang set out expectations, and it's a very delicate balance, because like I'm not able to do this if I didn't receive a grant from APIC. Thank you, APIC. Um, and I'm probably going to seek out more grants in the future. But what I've learned also, like over the years, is that when you ask for grants, it's key to ask not for the whole thing, but only what you can definitely deliver and what you can definitely manage. Like I know personally that this whole project is still a mystery to me, what the final thing is going to be. Like I don't know if it's gonna be a feature film, although I have enough story for a feature film. I also don't know if it's gonna be a series, because it can be. I'm still coming up with storylines. Like I I love imagining like what Marichin's adventures are. I'm currently working on the second book with my illustrators, si Miriam Pakaira and Maddie Boone. And we're talking about damang fights, like spider derbies, because we grew up with spider derbies in the province. Or we talk about the habits of fantail birds, like the Maria Capra bird, where like they're very territorial, so they'll sort of stalk you when you're a newcomer, and then they'll try to harm you, and then until they get trapped in your house and you have to talk to them. Like all of those stuff um, are stuff that I can tell through the Marichin character, or like what it's like to quit school for a day to go to a waterfall, because that's what we did in high school. Yeah.
I love that. I have 3 more questions for you. Do you want to say something about the roost?
Okay. So part of like community building for me is also setting the stage for it, or at least creating the environment for it. Like I was talking earlier about structures, no, and I don't necessarily disagree with structure. I think that structure is necessary, but there's not one way of building structure. There's multiple ways, and sometimes it can be a venue. Sometimes what you need is to have like a place that you go to, a third space, since we're losing those, a third space that you go to where tools are available, where power tools are available, because like so many people have these ideas but no way to act on the ideas because they simply do not have the tools, or they don't have the space for it. Like I want to make a dollhouse. I want to make a dollhouse that looks like a tree. Where can I get a drill? Where can I get a pickup truck so I can pick up the blah 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 blah? All of those things that limit us. And when we're around a community of crafters, when we're around a community of other builders and artists, and we're constantly around each other in each other's peripheries, there's more room for collaboration. So a bunch of Bay Area based artists and I are putting together money to rent this warehouse space in Oakland that we're calling the Roost, and we're putting our tools together. We're putting our offerings together because we want to give workshops me and Christian are talking about doing guerrilla filmmaking workshops. I want to do screenwriting workshops. There are artists like Ting Agpalo who teaches Igal in different areas, and they also they have such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to weaving techniques. And then speaking of weaving techniques, there's also Lauren Benetua who is a weaver, and they're gonna be bringing looms into the space, so that's really cool. And there's also Josh Ikban, who is an artist who's been more recently incorporating indigenous Filipino instruments into their work. So they're also part of the space, and they're also going to be teaching out of the space.
Oh, that's so wonderful. You're forming this collective so that you can bounce, that creative energy bounces off each other, but it's literally a space to hold all of your tools for your crafts.
The goal is really to allow for these art forms to evolve, right? Like we can't evolve in a vacuum. We need to be around other artists in order to be in dialogue, in order to be in conversation with each other about where our sensitivities are. The reason we're sensitive is because we are the ones who are bringing a mirror up to people, and we need to be in conversation. Otherwise, we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel. We're constantly like, I feel like it's a little shady to say now we're constantly making identity stories when those stories have been told. It's just they're not reaching us. They're not reaching the audience. So that's another thing I'm passionate about, like distribution when it comes to Filipino films and Filipino stories.
Such a great point. I just think about myself like as an artist, so much of it is solitary, and I'm like, I am tired of talking about my inner psyche. Like, and there is something. I mean, I've done different collaborations, and I always feel this other energy. It's like I mean, I love my solitary space, but at some point, how do you share? How do you collaborate? True
Yeah.
healing is in community, and as a collective that have been, so for whatever reason, have been forced to
Yeah.
live more individualistic
Oh my God,
lives and
yes.
being away from the motherland. Like, it makes sense that this is actually coming home to something that is so in our DNA, which is being with others and healing and creating in community.
Yeah, Lauren was saying something during one of our meetings. Like we have these community agreement meetings, and she was saying that she wants to return to a village and find that village. And I think that's what all of us want, that we want to go back to, like being able to knock on somebody's door and say, hey, do you have extra milk or something, which I'm also finding in like our local Buy Nothing group. I'm finding community in people who are just willing to geek out with me over Filipino folklore. So that's been fun. Like I've been meeting other Filipino authors here in the diaspora, and like they've also been giving me so many, like such a wealth of their wisdom.
Do you have any advice for listeners who may have ideas about pursuing meaning through a passion project or creative project, but may be stuck in their creative process?
Technique is a good way to shut down your emotional self when it comes to like exploring a project, because sometimes, like as much as personal projects are about trying to make sense of the feelings or trying to make sense of the jumble, when you lean into technique, when you like take workshops and then use the workshop to sort of funnel your emotions, then it becomes easier to compartmentalize it, I guess, and then to see it for what it is, or to observe it and to look at it. And I've maybe it's my Gemini moon that wants me to dissociate. But that's been my artistic process for the longest time. Like I'll be so mad, or I'll be so sad, or I'll be so like I'll be in longing, and then I'll be like, I can't do anything about this longing. That guy doesn't like me. So how about I box my feelings into a song?
Yeah, that goes back to the little kid, right? The little kid that didn't see themselves mirrored in any one community and created, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing was your approach to art was never driven by technique. It was always emotion. It was always spirit.
Yeah, and the technique was a way for me to just make sense of it. Like, it was not the goal. I'm not trying to be an avant-garde filmmaker breaking boundaries on like the best cameras to use or whatever. Like, I could never get on that
Yeah.
train. I'm here because I'm trying to express something because I have nightmares, you know. Yun na lang.
All right. The last question is a fun question. If you were stuck on a deserted island where you were going to be for the rest of your life and you only have 3 albums to have with you that you're going to listen to for the remainder of your years, what 3 albums would those be?
Oh, okay. You just described my childhood, you know. I was stuck in a deserted island.
So this should
And
come easy.
The 3 albums that I would take home if I were to return are, so I grew up to Astrid Gilberto's the Astrid Gilberto album, right? The one with Once I Loved, Meditation, Roses and Roses, Agua de Bebe. So yeah, so that's album number 1.
Great one, and I love her.
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, my mom has this because she used to sing Astrid Gilberto songs when she was a lounge singer when she met my dad. So she had the CD and that would be playing like every time we took people on tours, it would be playing in the car, it would be playing at home. So it was like the soundtrack of my childhood. And then the second album would be Gorillaz Demon Days.
Oh, what a great album that I haven't heard in a while.
Oh my God, that album. That one was the soundtrack of my high school and college. Like, the Gorillaz was a band me and my brother enjoyed. And then I sort of fell off of it because I had this raging goth phase in college. So I was into Tristania, like Cradle of Filth, all of that stuff. And then when I was recovering from that friend group, the goth friend group broke up because like everybody was toxic. I went right back to Demon Days and I just listened to Demon Days to heal from that. And so that's the second album. And then the third album would have to be Portishead's Third.
Which is sort of the forgotten gem because everybody refers to Dummy, which I love Dummy, the first one. But I love that third one.
Third was, oh my
Yeah.
God, okay, these are all healing albums for me because Third was this album that I had playing in my MP3. I think MP3 pa ba to? I forgot what thing it was that I was playing the music on, but I had it in my ears when I was trying to get through this really horrible shoot where people were talking shit about me. I walked in on a conversation where people were talking shit about me, and I was hearing them talk about how dysfunctional I was. And I'm like, yeah, I'm dysfunctional. Oh shit, they know my secret. And so like I'd cry to sleep listening to Third. So, like, I can listen to that album for all my days, and it will always be new.
Wow. And all 3 of those albums are so cinematic. I can see the draw. Especially, like, I the one I know the most is Portishead, and that their music is so cinematic.
So cinematic, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ara, I appreciate you, and you inspire me as an artist because you're not afraid to express yourself and challenge yourself and go into all these different mediums that I think if you were technique driven, you would be completely terrified. But because you're not technique driven and you're spirit driven, it probably is very easy because whether you're telling the story through song or through film or through dolls, it's a story, and stories give us meaning. I'm just so inspired by the work you do and what you offer to not just the Phil Lam community but beyond.
Salamat. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cry.
Yeah. As we wrap up, is there anything that you want to say that you haven't had a chance to say?
By the time that this comes out, the book would have launched. The Marichin Marukoy book launch was on June 1. The book is not available on Amazon. In the Philippines, it's available in a lot of indie bookstores. But maybe by the time that this is released, I would have at least talked to indie bookstores in the Bay about putting my book out.
Great. Well, how can people find out more about your work?
I'm still on Instagram these days. Ara Chawdhury is my handle, or they can check out the Marichin Marukoy Instagram, which is where I mostly post updates about the stop motion project.
And all of these links I will have in the description box for this episode. Ara, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your gifts with us.
And thank you so much, Larry, for your questions also.
What a privilege it is to have this sit down with Ara, to chat about her life, her art, and the motivation behind her path to meaning and purpose. I feel inspired by her ability to just go for it and create from the spirit, and her courage to experiment across multiple mediums while bringing the same passion, point of view, and imagination. I hope this episode inspires you to take risks with your creativity and play more with your intuition and spirit. Thanks again for listening to Out is Through. Until next time.
The views expressed by the speakers are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Out is Through is a podcast for entertainment and educational purposes only. It's not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are in need of support, please seek out a licensed mental health professional in your area.